So we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with Sally. And so let's see if we can get Sally. And then otherwise, I'm just going to get started in honor of Sophia, who's in Pakistan now.
Oh.
So Sally, can you hear me? I don't think we're going to have Sally with us in a continuous way. She's coming in and out, and she has the first film.
Yeah, I'm here, but I have bandwidth issues, so run with it, Jay.
So I'm going to run with it. Hello to everybody. It's great to see you. And our beloved Sophia is in Pakistan now at a wedding. And so she's okay, but she'll be there for 3 weeks. But she's trying to come in. We may see her today. We'll see. But I'll try to do what Sophia would do. And you just pretend it's Sophia on the first part. So here we are at here we are at Spirit in the Movies. That's our theme. And we're considering the possibility that today film functions in a way as scripture, not formal scripture canonized by an institution, but informal scripture from which people gain meaning and insights for their lives. So we're sharing movies that we love or that are interesting to us that will provoke discussion. And I'll remind you that our gathering is sponsored by 3 organizations. One is the Interfaith Center of Arkansas, in which Sophia and some of you are so active. And one is a group based in Claremont, California, but spread out all over the nation and the world, called Process and Faith. And I welcome you to become a member of that. And I know Nita's a member of that. Len's a member of that. If you'd like to, just go to processandfaith.org, and that will explain to you what it's about. And the third is an organization also based in California, but with worldwide reach, and it's called Spirituality and Practice. And it's where you find your movie reviews and a lot of other materials on its website. And many of us, I certainly, have come to appreciate its alphabet of spiritual literacy. A to Z. A is for attention, B is for beauty, C is for connection, D is for devotion, E for enthusiasm, F for faith and forgiveness, G for gratitude, H for hospitality, I for imagination, J for justice, K for kindness, L for listening, M for meaning seeking, N for nurturing, O for openness, P for playfulness, Q for questing, R for reverence, S for silence and also for shadow, U for unity, V for vision. And by now you're wondering what in the world X will be about. And X is for a sense of mystery, the uninframable, the unnameable. So those are the 3 organizations that sponsor us, and we're grateful to them. And we're going to go now to our first film, which is Mission: Joy, and it's recommended by Sally. And if Sally can jump in and participate, that's great. We'll see. But I think first things first, let's watch the trailer. Can you show that to us, Lewis?
We are going to be free!
Sex.
Did you say that? You are a monk, remember? I've sometimes said to him, the cameras are on us.
Honestly, the energy between them is 8-year-old boy.
You are mischievous.
What is the purpose of your visit, sir?
Just enjoy our friendship and talk about joy.
I don't think you could find two people on the planet who are more different than the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. One grew up in absolute poverty, the other grew up in a 1,000-room palace.
Unfortunately, that person is Christian.
Unfortunately, he's a Buddhist.
There's a lot of shared background. Both of them have deep history of struggle against authoritarian systems.
The Tibetan people are being exterminated. Their culture and religion are being stamped out.
Age 24, I lost my own country.
Amid tear gas and police dogs, Desmond Tutu led a people against apartheid.
When people decide to be free, absolutely nothing is going to stop them from becoming free. You can overcome the most horrendous circumstances and emerge on the other side not broken. When you say you are pursuing happiness, you are not going to find it.
Happiness isn't just something that feels good. Happier people, they're physically healthier, they have stronger immune systems, they even live longer.
Ultimate source of happy life, inside, not outside. We really become something quite special.
Yes.
I think at the time of my death, I will remember you.
Thank you.
So I couldn't help but laughing a couple of times during that. I don't know about you, but it's certainly contagious, even over the screen. Sally, let's see if you can make your presentation. And if not, I will say what you said to me and we'll proceed along those lines. So give it a try, Sally, okay?
All right, I'll give it a try. I want to say both of these men had really hard lives. They did the right thing on an individual scale. They didn't know how it was going to be turning out. Long before they were famous, they got to know each other and recognized that spirit in one another and became playful. They like each other. They play and they share great joy, but without being the least bit pompous or they're both holy, but they don't have to be pompous. I don't know a better word for that. So I kind of want to throw it out to what brings you joy, and does it have anything to do with your faith? And my second thought question is, what is it about joy that makes humans want to share it? I think joy is doubled and quadrupled when it's shared. And I don't think I'm the only one, but I think that's something special about joy compared to other emotions. It wants to be shared, as Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama are doing in this film.
Sally, you came in and out just a little bit, but I think we got your questions easily enough. So I'll take it from here, and please jump in, Sally, anytime you want. But let me ask you Sally's first question. What brings you joy? And Louis, you can go back to the gallery view, or I'll go back to the gallery view for this, so I can see people.
I will spotlight whoever's talking, so that everyone can see whoever's talking.
So question number one, what brings you joy? And I know there's lots of things, but why don't you share one thing that's kind of special to you? Mary, unmute, please.
So sorry.
I think people bring me joy. I've been much more aware during this pandemic how much more joyful I am when I am in the company of people. So, and I don't know that I was that conscious of that before. So I think people definitely, we are pack animals, and the pack really brings me a lot of happiness. And my dog brings me so much joy. So those are the two things that come to my mind.
People and dogs. All right, who will name something else that also gives you joy? We've got two so far, people and dogs. Carol.
Hi, I think Carmen raised her hand first. Okay, I was going to say connection and creativity. So connection can be to God, to nature, to others, but feeling connected, not feeling as if we're adrift, a particle adrift. So the reverse of that brings joy and creativity. Being able to use that particular part of self to contribute.
Relationship.
People, dogs, connection, creativity. Anybody else want to toss something in to the joy hopper? Carmen.
Well, I want to build on what Carol said. It's a connectivity, but it's also an openness to connection. It's an awareness. It's a being open to let something in. For me, there are so many things. The first thing that came to mind was a recording I have from when my daughter was very little, her first giggles. And I can play that recording and I don't care what's happening, I'm joyful because it's related to all of those memories and my connection with my daughter. But it's also, or when the dog's happy, as you said, or when I'm outside and I hear a bird sing and I'm open to that, especially if I'm surprised by it, or wasn't expecting it. And I can be very joyful, or I'm open to just looking at something in nature and really seeing it, maybe for the first time that day. So for me, it's not the specific thing, but an openness to what's there.
Thank you, Carmen. And I think, Steve, did you have a comment or a thought?
Yes, and I think my first thought was grandchildren. My grandchildren bring me joy. But then as others were talking, it's like people bring me joy, relationship brings me joy, the connectivity brings me joy. But then there's the paradox that also silence brings me joy. And being in nature brings me joy. And really those are not opposites, but there is that, it's almost like inhaling and exhaling is breathing. So sometimes being with people brings me joy, and sometimes being silent in nature brings me joy equally.
Thanks, Steve. Anybody else? Tina, I think you had your hand up. Tina, yes.
Gee, I agree with what everyone before me has said. All of those things bring me joy, and particularly relationships. But the most significant relationship recently that has brought me joy is my one and only grandchild, Alex, who is 5 years old. And he just sees joy in everything. He was here a few days ago and we were out in the backyard and he was picking up pine cones, and he said, look, this little pine cone looks like a Christmas tree. And he'd go pick up sticks, and he would pick up some little well, they weren't really flowers. They were more like weeds, but they had little purple flowers. And and he wanted me to put them in a little bowl of water. And he said, look at these beautiful purple flowers. And, you know, the whole world is joyful to him, and the little things in nature. And those are just wonderful things to think about, you know, those joyful things in a world that it seems to be increasingly more complicated. And the fact that he can, as a young child, he sees all the good in the world. And that's, gee, we all need that right. We all need that right now. Yeah.
You know, this discussion makes me wonder, is there a difference between joy and a sense of wonder and a sense of freedom, in a sense of gratitude? They all kind of blend together a little in beauty. They blend together, at least in my mind. But another question is, do you distinguish, and I bet you do, between joy and happiness? And if so, how would you describe the difference between joy and happiness? Nita?
Yeah, I think happiness is a feeling more, and joy is a state of being. And one of the things that's predominant in the film and in the book of Joy is that they both talk a great deal about how you can have joy in suffering and service. And one of the things that and the Dalai Lama especially keeps talking about, it's an inside job, not just an outside. You know, I can feel happy when I can just go hug somebody, but that persistent, deep, almost cellular kind of joy is deeply within, not just a fleeting feeling that can come and go. And I love the part in the movie where, and several times when the two of them would be talking, one of them would tell something of their suffering growing up in their various situations. And the Dalai Lama would reach over and grab Desmond Tutu's hand often. And then when Tutu would be telling us, you know, heartrending story, the Dalai Lama would be rocking and his lips would be slightly moving, as though he felt completely whatever Tutu was saying, and vice versa. They both prayed for one another as the other one was telling of their suffering. But they came out of it with joy because it was such a deep spiritual thing, not just a fleeting moment.
Thanks, Nita. Lynn. Unmute, Lynn.
Got it. Thanks, Nita. That is beautiful. And I think that sort of, you mentioned suffering. Let me see here. That thing was right in my view there. It's almost like the movement from suffering and having a sense of freedom, maybe in the midst of suffering. So they can happen simultaneously. And I mean, gratitude goes with that so much too. But I sometimes I think that our culture, in contrast with Buddhists or maybe other cultures, use happiness more. It seems in sort of depends on externals more, and what, you know, of the feel good that is even not necessarily healthy even. But happiness is often in our culture, maybe it's capitalism that says, here, you need this to be happy in a sense. But I think that my understanding of the way that Dalai Lama uses happiness is very much like that inside awareness that is so closely connected with gratitude and some of the other things you mentioned, Jay. But I think of it very much though as a both and. It holds in that spiritual depth that joy can hold the pain and the suffering. And I mean, I think about funerals, just one of many different ways, but funerals, they're the tears of joy and celebration of someone's
Mm.
life along with the pain of the loss.
Thanks, Lynn. Carol.
Carol, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. That's so rare, so I always have to remember that. I feel like happiness, or at least when we say ashrei, you know, the Hebrew word, it means that you've arrived at happiness. Either you've worked at it or you've arrived. And joy feels like a surprise. You just open yourself. The outcome isn't yours. It's, you just open to what it is in the moment. And they seem different in pacing and intentionality, so yeah.
Thanks, Carol. And one thing that I want to take note of in the Dalai Lama's relationship with Desmond Tutu is their laughter. And they laugh a lot. And it's kind of hard. Laughter is so contagious. You find yourself happy as they laugh, or joyful. I don't know what word to use. And that's led me to wonder about the spirituality of laughter and also the role that laughter plays in the world's religions, and doesn't play. And we wish did play. So on the one hand, I grew up a Protestant Christian, and I think I still am. But I have to admit, religion it didn't so much include laughter. It was, for the most part, kind of serious. But on the other hand, I've studied traditions where I see laughter as almost a practice in its own right. And one of them is Zen Buddhism, where humor plays a very important role. And the other is Judaism, where there's traditions of humor that have really been part of what it means to be Jewish. So I just want to lift up that subject for us to carry with us. What's the relationship of spirituality and laughter? I once heard someone say that there's two forms of letting go, laughter and tears. And they both do the same thing. In tears and in laughter, something falls away. There's a kind of opening out, at least for a moment. Sally had another question, and she's posting comments as she goes. And her question is, why do we need to share joy? Why is it important to share joy? And maybe for some of us, we might say, well, gee, I don't know that I do need to share it. It's kind of self-contained. It's okay. But I bet there's a lot of us that find a need to share joy. And I think that's Sally's question. Why is that? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Does the sharing of joy in some way complete the joy? It's not complete without being shared. What do you think?
Jay,
Steve.
I feel like joy in a way rises up from within us. And so it overflows, and that is the natural flow, that it overflows to those around us. Whereas, if we're thinking of happiness as circumstantial, we may or may not choose to share our happiness, but it's almost that, as Carol put it, that surprising joy is up and out of us and spread to others before we may even realize it. So it's almost, joy seems to spread more organically.
It's kind of like water, and it has to flow, or like a stream, it has to flow.
I was going to say waves,
yeah.
Or electrons, or, maybe we can say energy. Right. That nameless substance that infects us all. Somebody used the child as an example. Children are joyful, and we come in contact with that, and then we're infected with that.
Huh, yeah. Yeah. Now, Sally herself is shaped by evolutionary thinking. And I'll let Sally speak for herself if she can. But I will speak a word about that theme if she can't. Sally, do you want to situate this in the context of evolution? Can you do so?
We are very social creatures. Our brains developed as social brains. And in the cases where I have shared joy with another person, it's a very tight bond that we always remember that we were together at that time, that moment of joy. I think that one reason we like to gather for worship is because sharing that joy.
And if you're just a straight biologist.
So the joyful tribe survived. The joyful tribe
That's right.
survived. That's what I mean.
That's true. That's true. We came out of Africa. Our origins as a species are in Africa. So we learn. And why did we emerge in the first place? And what Homo sapiens? And why were we not more solitary? There are species that are solitary. And one argument was that we needed to cooperate, and we found cooperation helpful in our very evolution. It worked. It worked. And you can kind of wonder if the need to share joy isn't in part also a need to be with others in a cooperative way. And in that sense, part of our evolutionary heritage. Sally, anything more that you would like to say about this before we turn to the next one? Anything more? Or anybody wants to say?
I watched the movie. It's available for free in various times. So I sent a link to Lewis that's free on March 11th, but it's really a good one to watch. And there's a series of global icon books. This one is Hope, and it features Jane Goodall speaking about climate change and how is it possible to have hope when things are so bad. She explains that, yes, we do have hope, and we need hope, and we've always got it. So
let there be.
So there's joy, and then there's hope, and then what's the next book going to be?
And by the way, Steve put up a comment saying a 6-year-old laughs 300 plus times per day, and an adult laughs 10 to 15 times per day. Coming as a child is more joyful. Good point, Steve. I know a nice Jewish teacher who said, "Blessed are the little children, let them come unto me. For theirs is the kingdom of God." And I'd simply like to add, theirs is the kingdom of laughter. With that in mind, let's turn to the next one. And there's much to talk about, but I know that no one has seen it. But I think the trailer speaks for itself. Have you seen it, Carol? The whole thing?
We've watched
Steve.
it. Neil and I
Oh,
watched
did
it.
you? Well, way to go, and thank you. So, and Lynn has seen it. Okay, I just take back everything I just said. So,
Just bringing us a little joy. That's a-
well, let's watch the trailer nonetheless, and then we're off. Here we go.
It has been said that we are deeply connected by an invisible field that unites us all. Mystics have known about it for millennia. Scientists are on the cusp of proving its existence. The first to hypothesize about this field was a little-known physicist named David Bohm.
Some source of new ideas is needed of a much higher energy.
Einstein referred to him as his spiritual son, and the Dalai Lama relied on Bohm to be his science guru. But the scientific orthodoxy worked hard to suppress his radical ideas. Raised during the Great Depression in a Pennsylvania coal mining town, his childhood was hard. Yet Bohm possessed a rare and maverick intelligence that got the attention of the greatest minds in science. Bohm then began to explore a revolutionary idea.
The Bohmian theory made a clear prediction about the non-locality of the world. What is non-locality? Non-locality is really, to put it in simple words, the profound discovery of the interconnectedness of the universe.
But Bohm's progressive ideas were a threat to the scientific and political establishment at a time when they were focused on one thing alone.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
It was decades before we developed sufficient computing power to simulate Bohm's mathematics, describing this quantum potential that underlies the known universe.
We were quite staggered how amazing this story was, which had never been told.
Today, scientists are devising experiments to prove the existence of the quantum potential.
The work of people like Bohm, Einstein, they are like huge windows opening in the imagination to a way of dealing with life and the things we encounter within it.
David Bohm, I think really something like opener of our mind. So grateful.
It has been
So I'll say a word or two about David Bohm and about the film, and then we'll talk. But it so happens that I met David Bohm. And so when I was in graduate school, I studied with a philosopher theologian named John Cobb, who was very influenced by a philosopher named Alfred North Whitehead. And Whitehead's idea was that everything is connected to everything else, not just through causal influence, but through feeling. And in Whitehead's philosophy, feeling and energy are the same thing. Wherever there's energy, there's feeling. And whenever there's feeling, there's energy. I myself had also studied Buddhism fairly thoroughly and practiced meditation, still do. And I learned from Buddhism, everything is interconnected. Again, not just everything causally influences everything else, collides with everything else, but everything is enfolded within everything else. Every part contains the whole. The universe is in every grain of sand. The universe is in every moment. That language, by the way, comes from William Blake, the poet. And so when I was in graduate school, we heard about this physicist, David Bohm, who was saying much the same thing, except he was deriving it from physics, not so much from Whitehead's philosophy or from religion or anything like that. On strictly physical grounds, he was saying, we now come to see that the universe doesn't consist of separate substances contained within themselves. It consists of events that contain all the other events and cannot be themselves without all those others. So David Bohm came and he gave a talk where I was in graduate school, and I remember sitting in the audience, and the talk lasted for about an hour and a half, and I did not understand a word of it because it was all physics and numbers on a blackboard, but I did understand the basic point that it's very important for me, for us, to recognize on scientific grounds, no less than spiritual grounds, that things are parts of one another and cannot be so separated. Then I started teaching at Hendrix College in Arkansas. And I began to meet many students that were disaffected from religion. They were spiritual, but not religious. They may have grown up Jewish or Christian or Muslim or whatever, but they didn't want to have anything to do with religion and the organized religion. They're what we now call nuns, none of the above, thank you. And so one time I taught a course on ways of conceiving God. And I actually thought it was a great course. And I talked about 16 ways to think about God. And I was so proud of myself because I'd given them a perfect map, conceptual map. And one of my favorite students came up to me at the end of the course, and she said, "Dr. McDaniel, I really appreciated this course." And I said, "Oh, thank you very much." And she said, "Yes, I appreciated it because I realized from it that I'm not interested in God. Mine is a spirituality of connection, not a spirituality of God." And she heard the word God as inevitably pointing to something external and separate from this world, this life, this universe. And I didn't argue with her. Your experience is your experience. But I got the point. And I began to realize there's a lot of people today, including nuns, that yearn for a spirituality of connectedness. They're not sure what they make of God. They're not sure what they make of organized religion, but their hearts yearn for somebody to say and for them to feel, you know, we're all in it together. And the we that's in it together isn't just the people. It's the animals and the plants and the cells and the stars and the galaxies and the supernovae and the microbes. And it may not always be happy, but it's a seamless web. And so David Bohm, because he came from a science background, had a kind of credibility, if you know what I mean, because we live in an age that kind of privileges science as important. You know, if I went and said, "Hey, everything's interconnected," they'd say, "Thank you, that's new age," and I've heard that many times. But if David Bohm says everything's interconnected, you say, "Oh, really?" And you get that from physics. So I'm grateful for David Bohm, and he's excellent. You know, the image that he worked with a lot, do you know in photography, there's something called holograms, where you have a particular image that's actually made of all the other images. All the other images are contained in the image itself. All the other things in the world are. He said, our universe is holographic. Every single particular thing is a hologram. It contains the others. And he said there's an inside order as well as an outside order. And he called the inside order the implicate order. That was his phrase. So that would be to say that you and I, we carry with us, not just us. We carry with us everything else too. So that's my little talk on David Bohm and the theme of interconnectedness. One more question here before I raise a question myself. Has anybody read The Tao of Physics by Rupert Sheldrake? Anybody remember that book? The Tao of Physics. Rupert Sheldrake is a scientist too. He's still up and alive and going. Many people connected this sense of interconnectedness with Asian religions. That's what the Taoists say, or that's what the Buddhists say. And that's certainly true. There's deep themes of interconnectedness in those traditions. They also exist in the Western traditions. So my first question to you is, and I don't like this language, but if I pinned you to the wall and I said, tell me, what do you want your life to be about? What is your spirituality about? What is your faith about? Would anybody say, well, I think it has a lot to do with connectedness? How important is connectedness to you in understanding what your heart is or wants to be about? Any response? Carol? Oh, I thought your hand was up. Was your hand
Oh,
up?
that's okay. I always have something to say, whether it's relevant or not, it's up to you. I think our declaration, our core declaration is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Listen up. God is one. One, not two. It doesn't mean numerically. It means wholeness. And so I think that's the core. That's the pin of my sense of self and world, this oneness. And I had, in the 80s, I had an opportunity, somebody brought Boehm's theory to my teacher in Jerusalem. And I remember working with holograms actually to try and understand it. But I have to tell you that the article you sent, though I tried to read the link that had an article, though it was in English, and I know all those words independently, reading them together was like entering a tunnel of confusion. So the movie was very helpful. But I think it's a mindset. I mean, what I gleaned from this is that it's a way of approaching the world and seeing the world instead of its component parts in its unity. And so that was very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Anybody else? What is connectedness to you? Lynn?
Yeah, it a little bit fits with what we were talking about, joy, sort of an inside internal awareness of, in a sense, I think from Bohm's perspective with the implicate order, there's a connection that's already there. And we emerge in our uniqueness with that integrated connectedness. And I think that it's partly a matter of epistemology. How do we think we know? And I think after a particularly age of enlightenment, it really got into the rational part. And now I think that we've been discovering with Eastern thought, as you were saying, but a lot of this most recent studies, I have really appreciate the work of Dan Siegel. He and a lot of other people, and he even has a book called The Mind where he talks about David Bohm some. But he talks about how the mind is not just this brain organ, but it's the whole system that includes clusters of nerves around the heart and around the gut. And that's, so it makes sense that we talk about, listen to your heart, trust your gut. Over centuries, people have talked in that way. And now as we become more aware of how healing from trauma can happen, it's got to be partly embodied awareness. That's not just this logical trying to be in control ego, whatever you want to call it. And I think that we're on kind of a cusp of another awakening in a sense, because we have the science of Bohm and this interpersonal neurobiology, Dan Siegel says, we've been taught the lie that we're not interconnected.
Mhm.
And I mean, he very much takes that. And so a lot of the research he does points to that as well. I got to say real quickly, I didn't know that you had met David Bohm back when I had your class back in 1980. Around that time, I had read an article, I mean, maybe the year before, an article in Psychology Today, and it was talking about Carl Pribram and the holographic model of the brain and David Bohm together. And from that time, it was sort of, this is fascinating. I got David Bohm's book that had all this math that I totally couldn't get a hold of it all, but the experience and the sense of emotional connectedness to me is, I mean, it's even sort of where joy emerges for me.
Lynn, thanks so much. And I should be a lot smarter than I am, because I met Pribram too.
Yeah.
And you would think that some of it would have rubbed off, only just a little bit.
One of the amazing things is I didn't know that back then. I remember.
But anyway, let's keep going.
One last thing. I have a memory like we were like in the mail area at Hendrix, and you asked me a question about something, and I said, I've been trying to understand Leibniz a lot and sort of monads, what that's about. And it's partly related to both of those.
Right.
It's funny, all these years later, I realized, oh, you met these guys.
Well, met means I was in their presence. So let's turn to, I want to concretize this for a little bit. It's easy enough to say everything's interconnected. It's a seamless web. Oneness is the ultimate reality. But in the nitty-gritty of our lives, that's where the connections are. It's with friends, family, and people we work with, the food we eat.
Rangers.
And I once had a student who said to me, Dr. McDaniel, I know that I'm connected with everything in the world, but I can't get along with my sister. And she was trying to show me, she says, this notion of interconnectedness, unless it gets grounded in the nitty-gritty of a person's life, is merely a slogan, merely an abstraction. So I would like to ask you, if you have, or if you're inclined toward a spirituality of connectedness, where do you find it grounded? Or where are you most challenged to realize it? Most challenged to realize it? Anybody want to share on that one? Tina?
I just wanted to mention that for me, two of the most vivid and lasting experiences of interconnectedness have been my participation in the Daughters of Abraham, which is a group of Christian, Muslim, and Jewish women who we meet monthly, and we study different books about our religions. And pre-COVID, we would meet in each other's homes and share a meal. Anyway, it has been really grounded in love and understanding the interconnectedness and the commonalities that we have from those Abrahamic religions, even though in some ways they are very different, but it's totally grounded in love, and it has made me feel very connected. And then the only other thing I want to mention as far as a profound interconnectedness for me is my participation, probably since 2002, in Jungian dream interpretation groups, which is just the interconnectedness in dreams, and if you're with a group, or at least this has been my experience, for a number of years or long enough to really get to know one another, it's just amazing the synchronicity and the commonalities that you can find, the themes and so forth in your dreams, individually and corporately.
Tina, I want to, Lewis, I'm going to call on you in just a second, but I want to just say one thing very quickly. Personally, I love commonalities, but I actually love differences. And there's a kind of connectedness that is available in the differences.
Oh, sure.
I've often suffered from what people call Jewish envy. In other words, I envy my Jewish friends. There's some beauty there that I lack. I can't find. Actually, same for Islam. So I wonder if connectedness doesn't find its home not only in discovering commonalities, but the deep appreciation of differences.
Yes, I agree.
As how beautiful they really are and can be. Lewis, go ahead.
I'm really interested in this idea of like the interconnectedness in everyday life. Sorry, I'm making sure I'm on spotlight. And like everyday life, and how like you connect with people to feel that interconnectedness. But I don't think I've ever felt like connected to the rest of the world in like traditional spiritual practices, or in when just talking with my friends, or when I'm out gardening. And similar to Jay, what she said about meditation, I think most of my like interconnectedness and understanding of oneness comes from sort of the destruction of the self, very much like in the Sufi vein. So whenever I think of like connection to the earth and oneness, I think of like dissociation from myself entirely, be that like dancing, like Sufis have a thing called a zikr, and I've gone to several zikrs. I'm sure a lot of people have, praying so much that you totally are just like out of your mind, and stuff like that. So I'm just really interested in that kind of connection with oneness, of kind of totally getting rid of your consciousness and just being physically there with the earth and physically there with the other people in the room. So I just thought that's what I was thinking of. I thought it was really interesting to bring up that connection, because I immediately thought, okay, dissociation and spiritual dissociation.
I think music too.
Yes.
In experiences where there's no more me, because I'm absorbed in something that's beautiful and the me drops away. That can happen in many contexts, but it's the dropping away of that sense of being a separate, isolated self. That's what's happening. Music does for people. I'd like to put in a little word for, I know Greg's here, he's a priest, an Episcopal priest, and I know your church, and I've worshiped there. And I think that liturgy can be a context for experiencing connectedness. It's a choreography. It's a dance, and you don't need to know everybody. And the rituals become a context for a kind of togetherness that does not require personal knowledge. But there can be a falling away into the dance, or at least a deep appreciation. And I'm sure that Muslims and Jews experience something of the same sometimes.
Jay, thank you for saying that. And the only thing I would add as well that is really powerful is we know when we're doing that liturgy that it's being done, it's being performed exactly like that around the world.
Yeah.
And that's a sense of connectedness.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Yeah. So anybody else want to say anything about connectedness? I'll raise one more issue, but if you just got a thought and you just want to get it out, do it.
Just, and I'll make it quick, but those who know me know I love physics and I love quantum physics. And I grew up about 15 miles from Princeton and then went to school not far from Wilkes-Barre in Pennsylvania, where Bohm was born. But really his whole drive was this sense of wholeness, that the universe was whole and that it was undivided, and that really separation is an illusion that we have created ourselves. And, when you talked about interconnectedness, especially on a more personal level, for me, I think it's mostly experienced in that place of vulnerability, in that place of compassion, where you are suffering with those who are around you, and so there's vulnerability, there's compassion, there is intimacy, and our mindsets become exposed. But somehow in that place of interconnectedness, we don't try to defend those mindsets, so that we begin to just connect. We begin to just become more a part of each other, a part of nature, a part of everything. And I love, what Carol said again. I mean, the Lord our God is one. That is not numerical. For the Lord our God is whole. And the universe is whole. And we are all a part, and the whole universe, as you put it, is in each molecule. And yet it's mystery. So I'm going to quit. I don't want it to become a long thing like when you had to listen to Bohm years ago, because it would get very boring. So thank you.
I like
That was beautiful, Steve.
Steve, but I think you're just as interesting, if not more. So thank you. As we draw this to a close, I want to have us all be mindful of what's going on in the world today. And Russia and Ukraine, and the culture wars in the United States, and the hatred that people feel for one another locally and globally, nation to nation and Republican to Democrat and the other way around. And in families, the fragmentation, the breakdown, the alienation. So in the house of incompleteness, there are many, many rooms. And they're all with us now. And so, how can we, in our own way, be vessels of healing connections? And let's recognize that not all connections are healings. Violence is a form of connectedness. Greed is a form of connectedness. If everything's connected, everything's connected. So I think what we're talking about is healing connections, and how can I myself be a vessel of healing connections? And I hope that David Bohm, in honor of David Bohm and others, we can take that question. At least I'm going to take it myself. I know that everybody in this room is also connected with our beloved leader, Sophia Saeed. And I hope, and she's fine, but she's in Pakistan. And so that's why she couldn't be with us today. But we miss her and look forward to when she's coming back. And I think she's going to join from Pakistan as she can in our subsequent meetings. And I just say, I think that's really pretty cool. To have somebody from Pakistan, in Pakistan, joining us. So with that in mind, Lewis, do we have films for next week? I think we have 2 more sessions. Is that right? And Sophia and I are going to take the last session, but we still have some openings for the next one. Is that correct, Lewis?
We've got one person that's planning on presenting next week.
Okay.
And then usually we fill up the other spot with you, Jay. But
Okay.
if you know, we can discuss that. If someone else comes up with a movie, then we can all discuss it.
All right. So with that in mind, many blessings to everybody and have a good week. See you next week. Peace in your heart, connection in the world. Take care.
Amen. Thank you.